Well, welcome to the first WESIG event of 2022. This is a really good turnout given that we haven't actually had any membership sign-ups yet. Today we've got Wayne Boardman. He is our main wildlife lecturer at Roseworthy. So if you ever have any questions about wildlife, go harass him. He loves it. Been a zoo vet. He does mental stuff with flying foxes. Just too many experiences. I'm not going to even bother to cover it. So
I do mental stuff, yeah.
Yeah, sit back and
Thank
enjoy.
you. Thanks. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. It's interesting that we've had a couple of chats with Alex about the WESIG and some of the things that haven't translated from year to year to year. So I was involved in 2009 when two students, Layla Haghighi, I've always had trouble pronouncing that name, and Zoe Anastasiades came to me at the zoo and said, we want to get some ideas about setting up a wildlife club or wildlife group at Roseworthy. And I said, well, so we talked about different things and what you could do. And so the thing then became the Adelaide Wildlife Appreciation Group. And so thanks to Zoe and Layla for instigating that. And then it's kind of moved into WESIG with Wildlife Exotic Species Interest Group. So you've changed it to an interest group. But what are some of the things that has not happened from what I can see is this kind of continuity of the like the people that work on the group, the president, the secretary, and all that sort of thing, and information that's being passed on year. So one of the things we organized early on was very cheaply discounted tickets for both zoos, and we had that organized, and people used to be a member of WESIG or AWAG as it was, and then they could through AWAG then could get the cheap tickets for the whole year. So it's a season ticket or annual ticket. And this is all, and Alex didn't know anything about this. So a lot of these sort of things have kind of been lost. This kind of understanding of the organization has lost. One of the other things that they did as well was institute an award, which is called the Wildlife Appreciation Award. So AWAG, a Wildlife Appreciation Award. And so I've talked to Alex about that in the fact that Alex didn't know really about that, but that was, so there's been some discontinuity of information passed on. So if you remember this organization, I think it's really important. I've spoken to Alex that you get an organization that actually helps with the continuity, so that you're not just here for the time, you're thinking about what's gone before and what's going to go into the future, so you can pass on this information. So I've been at the back, in the background of AWAG. I've given talks to AWAG and lecture and so on, and then as we came in, kind of there was information that was passed on, and so I've become less connected. So Alex has kind of broached the subject in contact with me, because Alex has been out catching sick bats with me, which is great. Sick as in inverted commas. I presume that means amazing. Yeah. I'm just trying to learn the lingo. And so because Alex has been out with me doing some field work, then we've had this opportunity to develop a relationship so we can talk about what needs to be done. And so I want you to know that you administer an award. It's about wildlife, yeah, but also we need to think about what is it about wildlife. So part of what I do is conservation medicine. So is it about individual animals that you want to learn about and think about, or do you want to think about the populations? Do you want to think about the conservation of the wildlife? So from my perspective, it's individuals make up a population, and the population is what you need to think about. And yes, it's nice to be able to do, bird, pet bird or pet reptile kind of health and so on. But to me, it's always what you can do. It's always been about, for me, what I can do as a zoo vet, and then as a wildlife vet, and then as a lecturer to help biodiversity and conservation. Okay, we've got this background of climate change that is occurring. We've got this biodiversity loss that's occurring. I've been arguing for 30 odd years about all of this and trying to do my little bit as a veterinarian to contribute. I've contributed in lots of different ways in terms of research, but also conservation programs in New Zealand and in Australia. But I want you to get involved as well. And so as a veterinarian, well, even as a student, I never even really thought about it from your aspect. I really knew that I wanted to do something with wildlife. It was David Attenborough that inspired me. And I met him a couple of times when I bought his books. So I won prizes at school. So I used to go and get the Life on Earth and the Life with Mammals books. And so he would go and do a signing. So I go and get, so I got these 2 books that he signed for me. So this is when I was at school, but I always knew I was interested in wildlife. And it was always, I was going to be a natural historian, a zoologist, but decided just before going into university, really, and not long before, just before going into year 11, to actually try and study to go to be a vet. So I always had this kind of passion as a veterinarian that I was going to do something with wildlife subsequently, and that I wasn't going to do the run-of-the-mill practice. But I did do some practice, and I did 2 years of practice in the UK and 3 years of practice in New Zealand before I got a job at Auckland Zoo as the first full-time vet in New Zealand. But basically, I kind of stumbled into it, really. So my experiences were related to the fact that I went to see practice at London Zoo. Anybody could do that, but we've got 2 weeks. At that time, I saw practice. We anaesthetized a giant panda and an elephant and a zebra, and we did a postmortem on an Aldabran tortoise. And we did all sorts of things in those kind of 2 weeks, and it just blew my socks away. We had an outbreak of botulism in Regent's Park Pond, so we were treating ducks that were in there as well. So there's a whole swag of different things that were going on. I did a little bit of a research project to get some information, but really enjoyed it. And then, but didn't really think how you could follow on that. No idea what you could do. So my interest in wildlife was about going bird watching and mammal watching and all that sort of thing, getting out in nature, which I love to do as much as possible, even now. And because that's what I felt most comfortable. But I didn't realize that there was opportunities. And are there any opportunities? So I didn't really look. I applied for a job as a zoo vet down in Port Lim Zoo as I was just about kind of graduating. I said that I'd like to work, but basically, dear sir, madam, I'm very interested in working as a zoo vet. Yours sincerely, Wayne Boardman. You can imagine. And I didn't know what to say because I didn't know. But what I had, I also didn't realize that I had this experience, which was going and spending 3 months doing research as a student through the Royal Veterinary College in Kenya. And we did a lot of wildlife nutrition stuff, a lot of postmortems on snakes. We did some anatomy kind of stuff, and it was kind of brought together in a kind of higgledy-piggledy way. It was a great experience. We went through a coup. We got stopped at gunpoint in the middle of Nairobi, which was completely quiet with a curfew and checked at gunpoint. So we went through kind of some really interesting experiences. It was a life-changing experience from my perspective. It's taken the whole lot. Oh. Is that yours? These are for other people. So it was a life-changing experience because I wanted to, having spent as a 22-year-old 3 months in Kenya, just amazing. Even though we did go through a coup, and my mum and dad were terrified that something had gone wrong, but we were fine. And so, that was the kind of experience. And I didn't realize, writing on this job to Port Lim Zoo, that I could have put that in there. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about the fact that I'd gone and spent some time at London Zoo. I did promote myself, hopeless, bloody hopeless. So I was, so you've got to promote yourself, the experiences, and you've got to get the experiences. I didn't even say that I like bird watching or what, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and so I just went into practice and thinking, how am I going to get to work with wildlife? What am I going to be able to do? didn't know what options there were. There was no such thing as conservation medicine. There was no such thing as conservation. No such thing as One Health. I'm not that old, but I am quite old. No such thing as One Health. No, the word biodiversity didn't exist. Conservation didn't exist. You know, all of those kind of. It was about the natural world, and the natural world is amazing, and we need to look after it. And I always felt that, you know, we need to look after different species, but never thought that there was a problem. And it's only kind of through the 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century that we've started to realise that actually we've caused quite a bit of damage to the environment, and our population is increasing, and we need to look after that, the biodiversity. And actually, biodiversity is really, really important for our health, more than we'll ever know, you know. And that can be in terms of just going out for a walk into the Kaiserstuhl or Sandy Creek, for example, Sam. Or you go to, you know, up into the Mount Lofties or wherever. Go walk in nature and try and just get used, enjoy it, you know. And that's one of those sort of things that I kind of like to do. So as I was going through this whole sort of process, I was thinking, you know, what can I do? I started to work in New Zealand in a practice that had a native bird park. And this native bird park was called the Otahonga Kiwi House. It was the first place that in New Zealand that had kiwi on display. Fantastic little zoo. And I did, you know, a little bit of work for them, but I really had no idea what to do or how to do it. So I wasn't very proactive. I was more reactive, you know. Anyway, you know, I did this bit, and then this job advert came up for Auckland Zoo to be the first full-time vet. So I applied for it. I actually did a better application, and I explained a little bit of things. I got some sort of confidence, or someone told me you need to sell yourself a little bit better about. So I wrote this handwritten letter because we didn't have access to a typewriter then, because there was no computers then. So I wrote this handwritten letter. It was a very badly written CV. I sent it in. They interviewed 5 people, none of which were suitable, and then they interviewed me as a second group of, and I did apparently a good interview, even though I didn't have any real experience. Not much experience at all. They gave me the job, and so it was a start-off job, starting off from scratch in 1989 as the first full-time zoo vet in New Zealand. So I was given a bunch of keys. Here's a room. The anesthetic machine doesn't work. The X-ray machine doesn't work. There's rat shit in the sink. There's a pile of bones on tables, and there's another room full of donated incubators. We had about 15 incubators from hospitals that they put there. So obviously, we're not going to use them. So I had to start from scratch. So it was an amazing experience to do that. And so one of the things I started to do was instigate opportunities for students to come and see practice from Massey University, and started to do some work for the Department of Conservation, working with endangered species like kakapo and kiwi, amazing species of birds that they have in New Zealand, all incredibly endangered. And in fact, once we I was the first person to anesthetize a kakapo, and there was 52 in the world at the time. And this one was being hand raised at the zoo, and it was being fed with a feeding tube, and the tube got stuck in its crop. So the tube came off, and this bird that was just about to kind of wean. So it was about 3 kilos, kakapo, flightless bird, amazing parrot. So on a Sunday night, I was called in. So I anesthetized it, and I anesthetized it for the first time in an emergency sort of situation. Looked inside and thought that they had this whole crop full of food. So I had to hold its head up like this, because if it anesthetized and it lay down, it would just regurgitate, and all of that would have gone into its trachea. And so I tried to get some forceps. I could see with an endoscope, and I could see it, but I couldn't reach it because my forceps weren't long enough. So I sucked out all the food, and then woke it up, got in contact with the mate. This was at sort of 9:30 at night on a Sunday. said, have you got some longer forceps? Yeah, so he went down to his practice, brought them into the zoo. We anaesthetized it for a second time, there and then, got the thing out, and it was fine thereafter. But you know, those are the sort of circumstances you do, and you know, you do these sort of things because you're put in those sort of positions. And now, you know, a lot of people have anaesthetized kakapo, and you know, there's been a lot of work done, and they've gone from 52 to about 160 animals. So they're still very, very endangered, and they're New Zealand's most iconic bird, really. So what I'm trying to illustrate to you in a way is the fact that, you know, I didn't know an awful lot as I was going, and I learned a lot of skills. I developed skills. There wasn't many people to work with, and I used a lot of my experiences as being a vet and translated them into being a wildlife vet, a zoo vet, and then a wildlife vet. And then it became, well, actually, there are jobs for wildlife vets. And so there was this kind of idea of developing standards and procedures for biosecurity for New Zealand and all those sort of things. And then, you know, in New Zealand, so at the time when I was in New Zealand, I decided, I contacted all the zoo vets, and there was about 9 zoo vets in total across Australia and New Zealand. And I contacted them and said, well, we should set up a membership of the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists exam for zoo medicine. And so they all agreed. I contacted the college, and we set up the membership exam back in 1990. I took it in 1994, and then in 1995 I did the avian medicine one as well. So that was just to give me a bit more knowledge, so like a bit more specialist kind of information. But in the process of doing all of this, I was, you know, being asked by students, how do you get into being, you know, a zoo vet? So there's only really a zoo vet, but can you be a wildlife vet and so on? So over the time, you know, having been working as a zoo vet in a variety of different places, and also now working as an academic, you know, I'm asked on many occasions how to get into kind of wildlife. And so when I think about, and so what is wildlife? You're working with wildlife from a biology, ecology perspective, or are you looking into wildlife from a veterinary perspective? Are you looking at individuals? Are you looking at populations? Are you looking at it from a biodiversity perspective or one health perspective? Are you looking at it captive versus wild? Are you looking, do you want to do work with captive or pet birds and reptiles? Some people like to do that. Or do you want to work in a zoo sort of situation? So like working with Adelaide Zoo and Monarto Zoo, they do an awful lot of conservation programs, and they really do. They've got a great laboratory. They've got lots of reintroduction programs, and so the veterinarians are involved in all of those. One of the things, you know, as a veterinarian, is to be able to work with other people, ecologists, biologists, and so on. But as an ecologist and biologist, then there's one or two things that can be learned from the veterinarian as well. But for the longest time, there's always been this kind of separation of ecologists, biologists, and veterinarians. You know, and I've been told on many occasions, not about me, but about other veterinarians, that veterinarians come in and just, you know, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. So it's a matter of being able to work very closely. And I think that a lot of that is now greatly improved over the years, because biologists are coming to contact veterinarians for certain things. What are some of the things that have started to happen? Like in the 90s, for example, we started to see the emergence of different types of diseases like baculovirus and hendrovirus, and there's always this kind of linkage to wildlife. And then, you know, we've always seen that there's a background with chytridiomycosis, which is a fungal disease of frogs, which is one of the threatening processes within the biodiversity of Australia. And then there's another disease called circovirus, or beak and feather disease virus, that occurs in lots of parrots mostly, but other species as well. And that causes pretty severe disease. Orange-bellied parrots, one of our most endangered species, which we've kind of worked with at Adelaide Zoo, which was part of a breeding program, is they fly between Tasmania and South Australia and Victoria. But their numbers have just declined, and that's partly because of the viral disease that they've got in that population. So trying to manage that disease from a veterinary perspective has been really important in trying to help that particularly endangered species, the orange-bellied parrot. We've lost several species of frog through chytridiomycosis. So these, and we've got this background of parvovirus, which has made quite a bit of difference to how we think of and perceive bats, and flying foxes, small bats and big bats, and then thinking about the Hendra virus, which is within horses, and everybody's now concerned about biosecurity. So biosecurity concerns have gone up, and we've developed the Wildlife Health Australia. So one of the things that you should always be, you can be a member of, is Wildlife Health Australia. So they're the Department of Agriculture kind of group that manages the surveillance and knowledge and understanding of wildlife health issues. And they have a kind of statutory responsibility and authority to look at and investigate wildlife health issues. They've just got a 8.5 million grant from the federal government to try and expand some of their work. So Wildlife Health Australia, have a look at it online. They have extraordinary numbers of, in fact, maybe I could I bring it up? I could bring it up. We could do that in a second. I'll remember. So Wildlife Health Australia has extraordinary level of information on wildlife diseases that have been collated over the years, and surveillance, and great understanding. So we're the University of Adelaide is part of the Wildlife Health Australia. So we do surveillance. We get a little bit of money from Wildlife Health Australia that goes primarily into the post-mortem room to diagnose any specific diseases. So any of the diseases that we're seeing in some of the dolphins at the moment, we've got some infections, Streptococcus inii, that's occurring in some of the Port River dolphins. They get post-mortem here by Lucy. We've got a student, Bex Suter, who's doing a PhD on it. And we get a little bit of money to actually do some surveillance work. And then we also put this information up onto a particular database that can be used by other people. So we're part of that organisation here at the University of Adelaide. So Wildlife Health Australia is a fantastic organisation. Another organisation that we need to think about, which is really, I'd love to see more involvement here. So back in 2015, we went to the Wildlife Disease Association, so WDA. So within the Australian context, there's two veterinary organisations that we think about, and I'm talking about veterinary organisations more so than anything else because that's what I know more of. But there are lots of biology. There's the Australian Mammal Society. There's the Australian Ecological Society of Australia. These are all those kind of organisations as well. But from a veterinary perspective, these two organisations, there's the Australian Association of Veterinary Conservation Biologists, AAVCB, and the WDA. So the WDA has a parent organisation in America that goes back to 1951. This was kind of set up in the 70s in Australia. Australian Veterinary Association of Veterinary Conservation Biology is part of the Australian Veterinary Association. However, it doesn't have as much involvement with veterinarians as the Wildlife Disease Association. I used to be Secretary Treasurer of that. I've been a member for that for a long time. Used to be a Secretary Treasurer for that. But by and large, this is now kind of superseded as the organisation within Australia. Back in 2015, we had the international conference for the Wildlife Disease Association. It was up in Maroochydore. And I've got a photo of me and 17 students including one of which one was a PhD student that went to that conference. And there was, there's about 400 or 500 people from all over the world went to that conference. And so bit by bit, with the kind of WESIG changes and lack of continuity in some of these sort of things, that lack of interest in the Wildlife Disease Association has kind of occurred, unfortunately. So I would like to see if that can be resurrected. We do have a wildlife, COVID's kind of stymied it a little bit, but we do have the Wildlife Disease Association conference once a year. This last year in 2020, we had a one-dayer. So each of the jurisdictions, because of COVID, had a one-day kind of workshop, and we had that at the zoo. And it was great. It was very well subscribed. I was giving a talk at the AVA conference 2 weeks before, and I gave a talk at the Wildlife Disease Association, and there was 5 times more people at the Wildlife Disease Association conference than there was at the AVA conference. So AVA, they do link in with these guys, the AVA, because that's part of them, and by all means be involved in it. But I think the Wildlife Disease Association, from our perspective, is a great organisation to be involved in within the context of just checking the time, within the context of Australia. So it's the Wildlife Disease Association Australia. So there's the main body, and then there's the Australasian. Okay, and sometimes they have. So if you get a chance to go to the conferences, please do, and also try and look at seeing if you can become student members. And it's pretty cheap to be involved, and you get the opportunities to go to the conferences. The conferences are usually in a nice place somewhere, some beautiful spots, and it's usually done on the cheap, and that's the way we like it, and hopefully it will continue like that. From an exotic disease perspective, there's the Avian Veterinary Association within Australia, and there's the unusual and exotic pets. So it's an Association of Avian Veterinarians. That's what it should be. So it's Association of Avian Veterinarians. So that has a parent body in America, but there's also Australian group, and those are mostly for people that see pet birds and so on. But there's a conservation link to it as well. And then there's unusual and exotic pets, which comes down to anything that might be exotic. There's no real reptile association per se within Australia, but there is one in America. So it's the American Association of Reptile Veterinarians. And so I used to be a member of that for America, so that I could get the journal, Avian Veterinarians as well. Went to the Avian Vet conferences, fantastic conferences up at Lamington National Park up in Queensland. So there's those kind of different types of organisations you can get involved in, and I can write this all down in an email for you that can go to Alex, and then she can distribute it to your group. So it's nice to get involved in some of those organisations. So those are some of the things that you can get involved in. Particularly, I would look for getting involved in this one. Yeah, the Wildlife Disease Association, a conference, and so it's really quite busy. And we're looking at trying to think about wildlife disease. So it's called Wildlife Disease Association, but it's really about conservation. So that's kind of an old anachronistic name. It might well be called a Wildlife Health Association in the future. And so, looking at One Health, diseases, how it's impinging on biodiversity, all of that kind of interrelationship that we need to think about. So those are some of the things that we can think about in terms of organizations. But what about you as a single person out there, kind of aspiring to be someone who works with wildlife in the future? So you've got to think about what it is that you're kind of interested in. And you don't have to make these decisions now, but it's nice to be able to think about what you want to do. And I've always talked to students about developing your CV now while you're at uni. What always happens with students is they work really hard to get into university, vet school, animal science, animal behavior, technology, whatever it is, work really hard to get in there. And then the next goal is, you know, how many beers you can drink at the pub, how many parties you can go to. Oh, sure, I'm supposed to be doing some work, of course. And then, of course, then it comes down to going through the semesters and passing exams. And, you know, time goes by, and then you've got to do a bit of stuff during the summer, you know, some placement stuff, blah, 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 blah. And no one starts to think about what they're going to do, you know, a year or two down the track. People don't want to think about it. It's too scary because university life's so easy, and you've got a lot of mates, and, you know, mates are looking out for you. And if you can't afford a beer, they can buy you a beer. And so you don't really tend to think about those things that much. But what I would like you to do is to think about how where you have your career in mind, thinking about it. And you don't have to overdo it. You don't have to dwell on it. You know, it doesn't have to be everything about what you do. And certainly not, because you've got to have fun. Sorry. Wondered where it was. From lectures from yesterday. Left it here from lectures. So, you know, it's not, you know, don't overdo it. Don't like psych yourself out about it, but just start to think about what it is that you want to do. So if you want to do unusual and exotic pets, or you want to work with birds, go and work and spend some time at a bird practice. You know, prioritize that with unusual and exotic pets if you want to do that. If you want to work as a zoo vet, go and work at Adelaide Zoo or Monarto Zoo. You know, prioritize those sort of things. And you know, we've had several of our graduates now have gone on to do different residencies. So there's Kat Johnson, who's did a residency at Massey University in zoo and wildlife medicine, based at Wellington Zoo, Massey University. She did pathology, zoo work, wildlife work, and a research project. Michelle Butcher's doing that one now at the moment. Sally Gazzard's doing a residency at Melbourne Zoo. Adelaide Martin's doing a residency at Healesville Sanctuary, and Taylor has gone to work at Australia Zoo, if you know Taylor Hawkins. So he's you know, living the dream. So when you look at what Taylor did, and you think about how I think about how he's looked at things, and you know, he's been really, really kind of focused on developing experiences. So he worked as a zookeeper before he became, and he did an animal cert 2 or something in animal science or something at TAFE, but then got into vet school, and all the way through he wanted to be a zoo vet. He wants to be a zoo vet, and so, you know, he got his, you know, all the way through he's been part of AWAG, part of WESIG, you know, been involved, you know, getting involved in all that sort of thing, but also spending time, yeah, seeing practice at the different zoos, and so got into a position to be able to get a job ultimately at Australia Zoo. But I don't think that's a stop. You know, that's the first port of call for him. But those other guys have also gone on and done practice. So what have they done whilst they've been in practice? And so when they've been in practice, they've gone on and done things with local groups. You know, go and get involved with the local groups. There might be, you know, it might be just about wildlife. It might be, you know, bird watching, or it might be, you know, helping with a project that looks at reptiles, or it might be, you know, some observation of seals and sea lions or something like that, you know, a wildlife related project. And once you've got, as a student, you develop these kind of experiences, you're adding all of these to your CV. Now, one student contacted me to put in, oh, that's what we're selling. So Sally contacted me because she was applying for the Melbourne Zoo residency. She sent me her application and her CV. I didn't say it was shit. because I never say things are shit. I just think they could do with improvement. But in reality, it was she didn't sell herself. She'd done all of these experiences, and she hadn't said what it was about these experiences that she learned, and all the things that she did, and how useful it was, and what she'd learned from it. You know, so being kind of reflective on what you've done, but also what experiences you had. You know, like with that job going back to Port Lim. You know, I could have said when I was at London Zoo, we anaesthetized, you know, I assisted with the anesthetic for a Grant zebra that we took embryos from that we then transferred to Cambridge to put into horses that were synchronized to receive embryos. And I didn't write in the fact that on a Sunday morning, we anaesthetized a giant panda that was very sick, and we went through the process of examining it, and we worked out that it had protein-losing enteropathy, and so we had to put it on a drip, and we use this kind of thing, and blah 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 blah. So I didn't do that. You know, I didn't even think about that. Barely thought at all in those days. But like students today, they barely think. You know, you're thinking about all those experiences that you're getting as students. They're going to help you with your CV. Go and spend some time with vets in practice that might be working with wildlife. Go and see practice with zoos. Go out with Sam bird watching in Kaiserstuhl. Oh, no, not while he's doing his project, because that'll bias the project. But you know, Sam's an amazing bird watcher. And you know, I used to be a reasonably good bird watcher in the UK, but I'm just not. I just don't cut the mustard in Australia. But it's one of those things I want to get involved in, because there's nothing I'm like more than actually just there with my binocs, looking at, trying to identify these flipping birds that I can't work out what they are. That's why you have someone like Sam who knows them, and they can help you. But the benefits of all of that, you know, being in nature and all that sort of thing, is gives you the opportunity to think about what it is that you can do. I'll leave some minutes, some time for talk for questions. But some of the things that you can do about, you know, getting that CV, making that CV look good, what it is that you want to do, thinking about now what it is you want to do 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Some people like to go out into practice to begin with as a veterinarian for a year or two to consolidate some of your skills, your surgical, medical skills, blah, blah, blah. Some people go out there and then they stay there and they never come out, you know. They always wanted to do that. And, you know, if they want to do that, that's fine. That's not a problem. I remember one student at Auckland, he was the most keen person to do a zoo vet. He went and saw practice at different places, San Diego Zoo, blah, blah, blah. And he was all dead keen. And I was helping him and, you know, doing this, and so on. Kind of lost contact with him. 10 years later, he was in the same practice that he was when he first qualified. And he kind of was wistful from the fact that he had all of those dreams and he didn't follow through with them. And I'm thinking, you know, and it was going to be really difficult to resurrect those, you know. I kind of was in a relationship and he got this practice, and you know, it's always going to. So, you know, he could have done some stuff within the practice sort of situation, but he didn't. So don't let a dream be stymied by lack of action and lack of you thinking about what you want to do and how you want to do it. Don't let time overtake you, and you know, you've got into a rut or routine that is comfortable. You know? Nothing about my life has been comfortable in the countries that I've moved to and the people I've met. You know, like going to New Zealand, didn't know anybody. Homesick for 3 months. You know, going to Perth, didn't know anybody. Homesick for 3 months. Going backwards and forwards, but you get over them. You know, because it's what it. I wouldn't change anything. All I would have changed really would have been the fact that I got in contact with that person I met on that plane in South Africa when I went there in 1995, and she worked for the Conservation Council of South Africa. And I was working in Perth at the time, and I contacted her. I was going to contact her, saying about what opportunities to go and work in South Africa, you know. So I didn't, because I didn't, you know. So idiot, you know, I should have done, you know, like things like that come into your life. You know, you're sitting on a plane next to a person who's mad keen about it. Well, you just get in contact with them. So you can contact people, you know, and ask for their advice and you know, ideas and so on, but also try and develop your CV as you go. And then think about what you want to do, you know, post-qualifying if you're a veterinarian, and then look at, you know, all these opportunities. And so one of the things I've made a resolution to do is, and this is on the prompting of Wayne Pitchford, he does agricultural opportunities. So I'm going to do a Facebook page with wildlife opportunities. Okay. Now I've said it. Now you're going to have to hold me to it. Okay. Wildlife opportunities. So that's about, and it's not about necessarily jobs, but it could be about experiences and so on. So I'm going to talk to Picture about it and look at, and so I can put all this information up. So we do work with the Rosewood Veterinary Alumni Group, which I hope you are, of you that have done veterinary bioscience. And going into the DVM program, you can be a member of that. And so I've posted jobs up there, but you know, I would only post jobs for wildlife because I don't care about anything else, to be honest. But now I'm going to develop this wildlife opportunities kind of Facebook page. So I'm just giving you some kind of overview on what it is. I can talk for quite a lot longer on this. I can go over it again. I can talk about different things about this, but I've just realized what time it is. I do witter on, I apologize. And so I think it will be nice if you can, if you want to ask some questions. I'm finishing it there for now, but we can talk about it more if you want to. Yeah? You have to speak up. I'm a deaf as a post. Are you a wildlife? No, so you don't have a stream, but you can do elective, no. So I do a wildlife elective in South Africa, or we're doing a wildlife elective in South Australia or Tasmania, not decided this year. So we can do that from an elective perspective, but you can also do EMS, Adelaide Zoo, Monarto Zoo, or Taronga Zoo, Healesville Sanctuary, whatever. There's all of these sort of places, but you can also do EMS at, you know, vet practices as well. So there's all of those kind of opportunities that you can get. One of the things that has just come up over the last 12 months, no, last 3 months, 4 months or so, is this new RSPCA wildlife hospital. So there's a reflection in the current wildlife hospital for the RSPCA. Have you heard about that? Yeah, so that's going to be at Glanthorne. So they've been in contact with me about giving some thoughts and advice on the facilities, but also how they are going to run that place. And I want to see, this is my desire, is to see a rotation, a final year rotation going down there. That would be, you know, the ideal sort of situation. We developed a vet school in Roseworthy. Unfortunately, it's really, we've talked about it, but it's quite an isolated sort of situation. And so that area in Glanthorne, you know, more central will be a much more useful place. And I would envisage that there would be vet opportunities to work for fauna rescue in practice. So, you know, a lot of veterinarians do quite a lot of work in practice for fauna rescue, vet rescue SA, all of the different kind of groups. So you can have that kind of experience, professional experience as well. One of the things that I kind of learned about that if you're really passionate about biodiversity and conservation and want to contribute to something, sometimes it's best to actually concentrate on your job that earns you money and then allocate some of your free time, your hobby, to helping conservation, research projects, helping wildlife. I met this guy, Willem Muller in South Africa, and he actually works as a wildlife vet, but he spends a lot of time earning money, so then he can contribute to cheetah conservation programs. So he goes and picks up cheetah from Chad and Ethiopia and relocates them to put them into better sort of situations. You know, amazing jobs that you can do with all those different types of species. So you can actually, and one graduate that contacted me a couple of years ago, and it's not materialized yet, but he said, I want you to advise me on how I can, in my practice that I'm going to develop, which is going to be a general practice in Adelaide, how can I allocate some of that income? And so it's a marketing tool for him, but it's also a potential for contributing money into conservation programs, you know? And so that could be given as grants to people, or it could be some actual work that people do. So there's lots of opportunities. So are there any other questions at the moment? Yeah.
Top of your head, conservation organisations you recommend volunteering with in spare time just to get those experiences?
Well, any of the conservation organisations within South Australia are great. So the Conservation Council of South Australia, or Nature Foundation in South Australia, see guys, all of those kind of organisations are good. So you can go and do some field work. How do you get in contact? Look for, you know, School of Biological Sciences. Are they doing any field work? Contact us here with, and I'll try and do this with the wildlife opportunities. See you guys. Any other questions? Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It should be at 10 past, but I'll probably talk too much. But I hope you found that useful. And I can talk more specifically if you want to. You can contact me if you want to. And we can talk more to join the lunch times in the future. Is there anything specific that you want to talk to me? I can talk to you about lots of different projects, you know, that I'm involved in. You know, I could give you a 3-hour talk on flying foxes if you wanted to. And I could do that without actually, you know, stopping for breath, you know. But I can also talk about some of the things that I've been involved in elsewhere, you know, some of the working in Uganda with chimpanzees and other species, and Cambodia and all that sort of thing. So I've got, you know, some experiences there that I can, and if it's a way of trying to give opportunities for you to think about where you can go and what you can do, then that's great, you know. And I can compile some of that, what I've said in a more potted version, bullet point version. But I think about what it is that you want to do. And ask if you're unsure, but think about you developing your CV. Think about where so start to set goals about what you want to do in the future. It's not just about passing your exams, okay? It is important because you can't do that without doing that, but you've got to think the bigger picture, okay? And you enjoy the journey all the way through, okay? It's like you enjoy learning because it's important, isn't it? It's really important. And so, yes, you've got to do the exams, but it's, you know, what can I get out of doing these sort of things in the future that are going to help me? You know? Hope that helps anyway.